Welcome. Hello, my name is Kevin Taylor, and I am the director of an organization here at Front Range that we're calling the Veritas at Caritas Institute. And I'd like to welcome you this evening to the second stage of our symposium, The Christian Call to Culture Making. So earlier today we hosted a full-day event for students here at the school looking at the notion of culture making, and had guests from a number of local ministries and career fields exploring with students what it meant to be godly culture makers. Sometimes said that Christian schools are bubbles in which people that send their kids there to protect them, abdicating the responsibility to the world around them by fleeing from it. And to be honest, sometimes there's some merit to that. We formed the VCI, though, because we don't believe that it has to be that way. In fact, it can be actually a less fearful and more intentional environment in which you do two things. The Veritas stands for truth, it's Latin, teaching our students to wrestle intellectually with the great issues of our day through the light of the story of God's love for our world. The Caritas part is Latin for love, and our aim is to give students the opportunities to bear the love of God to a hurting world, especially to those who are likely to fall through society's cracks. Our school already does quite a bit of this. We have a Go Wednesday program in which once a month everyone in our school goes out and serves somewhere across our geographical area. We have something called the Justice League, which is a group of students that partners with the Manila, Philippines office of the International Justice Mission, working on the issue of human trafficking. We have service-oriented practicum trips where in May, students will go for a week and serve someplace outside of their comfort zone often. The goal, eventually, the third leg of this, in addition to the truth and the love, is to be a model to other Christian schools who want to adopt a similar stance towards the world around us. We also want to partner with other schools and churches. And so earlier today we had the delegation of the student council from Denver Christian came to join us. We have a sister, or potentially a group of students from Korea who are going to have a relationship potentially with our school who are visiting. We had some homeschoolers that were here as well. And so in these cases, it's not a matter of wanting to compete with these other places, like you compete with Korea, but to partner with them. And our goal when Denver Christian went back to their school is that they might flourish better because they were here with us. There also tonight are a number of people here from different churches around the Denver area, and there are some partnerships there too. So our hope is that after you hear from Andy tonight, that you'll continue the conversation with other people within your church communities. And so before I introduce Andy, I'd like to go ahead and thank a few people who made the events of today and tonight possible. So my VCI steering committee for your ideas and prayers that were instrumental in planning this event today. For Steve Sage and the leadership of Deer Creek Church. To Nick Lillo, Larry Renault, and other folks at Waterstone Community Church. To Gary Fuller and the Denver staff of Crew. To Jeff Hainan of Denver Institute for Faith and Work, and many other pastors and leaders who publicized it and see the need for growing culture makers within their own congregations. Also to the faculty, staff, and board of FRCS, including DJ Turner, our communication director, and David Cooper, our head of school, who shares this vision of what a school can become. And then finally, on a personal note, I'd like to thank my wife, Heather, who's a great sounding board for ideas and very long-suffering as this event was put together. So without further ado, we'll introduce Andy very briefly so he can get to the good stuff and I can stop talking. He's executive editor of magazine Christianity Today, which is founded by Billy Graham and is a foremost example of what it means to be a thinking Christian. He's the author of 2 books, Culture Making and Playing God. And for me, it was one of the first people that sort of gave me a way of thinking and talking about Christians' responsibility to relate more faithfully to their culture. So he lives in Pennsylvania with his wife and 2 boys.
One of each.
One each. One wife and one boy, or
one boy and one girl.
one boy and one girl, and the girl's not the wife.
Separate.
Got it. All right. The wife and a boy and a girl. And most importantly, he is a fellow Boston University Terrier. So,
yes.
Andy Crouch, would you come on up, please?
Thank you. Although I'm not a very good Boston University Terrier, because I could honestly not tell you even like what chant I'm supposed to yell at this moment. What am I supposed to say? Woof woof or woof woof? Terrier, it's not the most intimidating of mascots. Our terriers will take on your Broncos. I'm so grateful to be here. And what a day has taken place in this school, a lot of it through Kevin's vision and leadership. Those kids look totally worn out by the time I got them at 2:30 this afternoon. And what a chance to get to be together tonight and talk about what it is to be Christians in the midst of culture, but also, as I hope you'll feel by the end of the night, just to talk about the goodness of the gospel and how much more good it is than we usually imagine. A few years ago, I started to have this hunch, and journalists are very quick to act on hunches because we don't have a lot else to go on. There's this saying, if it happens 2 times to an editor, it's a trend. And so one of the things that happened to me a couple times is that I started to feel that I was getting evidence that my fellow Christians and my culture were in a dysfunctional relationship. And the way that you know, one way that you know you're in a dysfunctional relationship is when both sides see the other at their worst. You know, when you get into one of those, I mean, it might have happened to you when you were dating, it can happen between parents and kids, it happens probably at some point in every relationship. You get stuck in this pattern where each person or each party sees the other just at the worst side of them. And of course, that gives both of them justification to continue seeing each other at their worst and hold their ground. And I started to feel that so often when I was in Christian settings, when people talked about culture or the culture, that actually what they were talking about was the culture at its worst. The culture at its most toxic, its most exploitative, its most shallow. But then I also started to feel that when I saw my fellow Christians represented in the culture, in the media, or when I even just heard my neighbors who maybe didn't share my faith talking about Christians, that what I heard about was Christians at our worst, our most defensive, our most fearful, our most judgmental. And I would think, when I was with the culture, think, well, that's not what my fellow Christians are like 80% of the time. There's 20% of truth to that. And when I was with my fellow Christians, I would say, but that's not all there is to our culture, 80% of the time. But it felt like all we were doing was just getting locked in this relationship where neither side could see any possibility for fruitful connection happening, or for, creating something better and beautiful together. So being a journalist, I started to try to think about this. And basically what journalists do, what we do, is we make complicated things clear quickly for people who could be doing something else. That's basically what journalists do. Make complicated things clear quickly for people who could be doing something else. This distinguishes us from scholars who make clear things complicated at great length, often for captive audiences. That gets a lot more laughs here than when I say it to scholars for some reason. But my job as a journalist, I'm married to a scholar. I think there's a lot of value in looking carefully at the world and seeing how complex it is. But my job as a journalist is come along behind that process and say, okay, what from this can we take and render in clear form for people who could be doing any number of things, as you could be this very evening, that will actually help people act in the world. So I started to just ask, as a journalist, what has happened to the relationship between Christians and culture such that we see one another at our worst? And what might be the way forward or out of this part of the story to something better? Now, back then, this was a number of years ago now, it really was a hunch, but it is no longer just a hunch. I now have proof that something is not quite right. And it came in the form of actually the other group of people who make complicated things clear quickly for people who could be doing something else, which is advertisers. Advertisers have to do that same thing. They have to take a very complex thing, some kind of product, and put it into a very few words and a very powerful image. And in a number of Christian magazines last year, 2012 going into 13, this is one of the ads that was running. Not in my magazine, I would like to say for the record, but in many others. Now, this ad is for a book by a pastor I respect very much, very innovative pastor. And I saw the ad before the book came out. So any comments that I or you will make in the next few minutes are not about the pastor who wrote the book or the book, because I still haven't read it. But what I was interested in was the ad itself, the image in this ad and the words that accompanied it. And I thought it was just stunning in putting into 4 words so many things that I think are not quite right about our relationship with culture. What I'd love for you to do is find one neighbor and just look at this ad together and talk about what you see, especially what it kind of tells us about how we see the culture and maybe also how the culture sees us. So find a neighbor and just for a couple moments, look at this ad together and talk about what you see, what you notice. And I'd love to hear a little bit of what you saw. So it's a kind of a big, somewhat quiet kind of room, I guess, but I think I'll at least be able to hear. I'll repeat back what you noticed. Let's just hear from a few folks around the room. Rubber gloves are necessary. If you're going to deal with culture, you need to be sheathed. You need protection and pretty industrial strength. These look to me one step up from the dishwashing gloves we have in our house. These are like industrial strength cleaning gloves that you're going to need. What else?
Substituted right into the Lord's Prayer.
This is the Lord's Prayer, 4 words from the Lord's Prayer with just a small change. Deliver us from evil. Deliver us from culture. Culture, evil, culture, pretty much the same thing. Just take us out of here, please. What else? Yes? Isn't that it's such a powerful image. I mean, this is why advertising is so helpful, because it crystallizes things. But is this the way we're supposed to pray, like insulated from the world? And there's something, for me at least, about also the way these hands are I don't know if I would say clenched, but held together. These hands are not actually even doing any cleaning. They're just saying, actually, while I'm protected, please get me out, if you wouldn't mind. Beam me up.
You think about the caste system and the untouchables.
The idea of
The lowest in the caste system, and then also here's the church and here's the steeple, but inside are all the people.
wow. Now, I have not thought before Bill raised this about here's the church, here's the steeple, look inside, see all the rubber-gloved people. I had not thought about that echo, but I think it probably is there. This is for a Christian audience. They've all gone to Sunday school. They've all done that little thing.
That's 20 years of advertising is ruined.
1 or 2 more observations.
The background looked like a blurred cityscape.
Oh, there's something... Yeah, and of course that's interesting too, right? It's not deliver us from anything specific about culture. It's not some particular situation that might be actually quite dangerous or whatever. It's just blurry, kind of generally culture that we're asking to be taken away from. Very interesting. Maybe one more observation, perhaps?
Where's the guy's head?
Where's the head of the... I guess it's like this. I don't know. That's interesting. You're not supposed to ask those kind of questions. And last comment.
It was actually a pretty good book. I read it.
And the book, just for the record, at least for, Mike can recommend it, and I have no reason to think it's not a decent book. There are a few ironies, actually, speaking of the book, not to meddle in anyone's business in this room or elsewhere, but it is interesting that this book is published by a wonderful Christian publisher where I have a lot of friends. I actually am working with them on a project right now that happens to be owned by News Corporation, one of the largest multimedia conglomerates in the world, owned by Rupert Murdoch, the folks who brought you, Family Guy and, Fox television and so forth. So think about this. A book published by a publisher wholly owned by News Corporation is playing Deliver Us from Culture. I sense an irony here. There is also the fact, I can't resist mentioning this, please don't tweet this part, that this particular gentleman, who is so creative and innovative, I am told has the largest indoor television screen in his church in the entire state in which he ministers. Delivers from culture. This leads me to wonder if this is a completely sincere prayer. And then you ask, if God actually answered this prayer, where would God deliver us to? Where would we be if we were delivered from culture? Because culture is not just publishing conglomerates and huge TV screens. It's also buildings. Deliver us from buildings? Do we actually want to have this meeting out on the prairie? Culture is clothing. Are we asking to be delivered from clothing? I spent a wonderful couple weeks in Greece a few years ago and got to go to these nude beaches. And there I discovered what a gift clothing is to 95% of humanity. 98, 99. Of the British tourists on the beach in Crete, 100%. You would look at these rotund individuals broiling like lobsters set out, like one after another, and you'd think, for the love of God and neighbor, put something on, just anything. I carry the scars of that trip to this day, and it made me appreciate culture. Deliver us from, we don't really want, and of course there is one other irony about this, which is that Jesus did address this topic in his own prayer, his own extended prayer, not the prayer he taught his disciples to pray, but when he let them hear him let them hear him praying, overhear him praying. In John 13 through 17, we get this long discourse and then this long prayer. We call it the high priestly prayer. And he says to God, there's something I'm not asking you to do, Father, and that is to take them out of the world. Jesus specifically said, I'm asking you not to deliver them from the world. I am asking you to protect them in the world. And so it occurred to me, this prayer is praying something that Jesus specifically prayed wouldn't happen. And we're saying, boy, Jesus, we know you prayed that, but actually we've changed our mind. Please just take us. And I began to wonder, why is this a compelling image for us? Because after all, advertisers work with who we are. They know who we are and what we want and why we want it, and they try to meet us there. Why this image and not something much more like this image? So this kid has been playing in the dirt. I don't know if you can see, his hands are totally covered in dirt. He is so psyched. And there's probably a white wall right on the other side here that he's about to plop his hands on. He's completely dirty with the world. But why is his mom or his dad, who's maybe taking this picture, or he's coming to show how awesome his dirty hands are, why are they not worried about this situation other than maybe the cleanliness of their home? Well, first of all, he's happy because he's doing what kids do. They play in the world. We're meant to play in the world. And when we're meant to work with the world, we'll get to that in a little bit. When we're kids, we're meant to play in the world. So he's doing what he's created to do, so there's no problem with that. And then why are they not worried? I mean, there's lots of toxic stuff out in your backyard, bacteria and viruses probably, and all kinds of stuff. Why don't they worry that he's going to be contaminated by this? Well, of course, because he has this amazing thing called an immune system. And a healthy child actually has a healthy immune system that allows him or her to go out and play in the dirt. And the body, if something gets in through this amazing barrier called the skin, actually, if something gets through that, the body sorts out what's healthy, what's benign, and what's unhealthy, and goes after the unhealthy stuff and manages the risk. And one of the great ironies of our time is we're in the midst of a great resurgence of allergies and autoimmune disorders and ways that the body gets very confused about what's safe and what's not. And one of the theories about why this is, why we have so many allergies in our own lives, our kids' lives, is that we now hardly ever play in the dirt, actually. Because when in your early years you play out there in the dirt, your body kind of starts to figure out what's healthy and what's not. But if you are constantly surrounded by antimicrobial stuff, I remember when we were having babies, we realized you could not buy things that were not antimicrobial. I was like, well, actually, for my kid's immune system, can I get the microbial, teething ring and the microbial high chair? Because actually that'll help them figure it out. So we just smeared them all with dirt and it was fine. The parents aren't worried because they have a healthy immune system. What if, rather than saying, oh Lord, please protect me, I've got to put myself, multiple layers of protection, and really I'd rather you just get me out. We ask, God, would you give me what it takes to have a healthy immune system in a world that sure does have toxins in it, does have danger in it, but also a world in which I'm meant to play. Wouldn't that be better? And in a way, what I want to give you over the time we have tonight is what I think are the ingredients of a healthy immune system. And they're really not at all about what you shouldn't touch and shouldn't do. They're about what health is for us as human beings and Christians in the midst of culture. In my kind of research and thinking, I came to believe that Christians over the last 100 years had adopted a series of postures, you could call them, that were not very helpful as we related to culture. So you go back 100 years, and what many, many Bible-believing Christians were known for, not always fairly, but perhaps not without some reason, was condemning culture. So my friends who grew up fundamentalist learned a lot about what you just shouldn't do. Don't go to the movies. Don't dance. Don't drink. Don't chew. Don't go with girls that do. Apparently, this was a rhyme. So if you are going with a girl who chews, reconsider, which actually is good advice. So the fundamentalists got some things right? But what they became known for was just all the things they were against. And their children found this rather constraining. So their children, among whom was a very influential man named Francis Schaeffer, said, maybe there's another posture we could adopt, not just wholesale condemning whole parts of culture, but what if we actually critique culture? That is, we go out and we look for parts of culture that are worth engaging, that are significant, that make kind of real claims about the world, and we actually enter into not critical in the sense of criticizing, but critical in the sense of critiquing, of listening, responding, pushing back, asking why you believe that, and using culture as a starting point for understanding how the gospel connected to modern society. So the fundamentalists said, don't go to the movies, but Schaeffer said, oh, absolutely go to the movies, especially if they're in black and white and made by a Swedish director with subtitles. So kind of complex, dark movies where no one talks for 20 minutes at a time. Now that's worth going to see, right? But this was a real step forward because the fundamentalists would have just thought that's atheist propaganda. And Schaeffer said, no, I think our culture is trying to tell us something in these works of art, these serious films, modern jazz, modern classical music. It's raising questions to which Christians actually have compelling answers, and we need to be in that kind of critical conversation with our culture. I think that was a big step forward. The next generation, though, it took things in a little different direction, and I guess the best word I can come up with for what they did is that they began to copy culture. And this took a few forms, but t-shirts are the most fun to look at, so here's a relatively recent one. I hope none of you have this t-shirt, or for that matter, since I'm close to Colorado Springs, someone might have designed the t-shirt in the room, I suppose. So I don't know, do you all know what part of culture this is copying? Right, the Staples Easy button, right? A red plastic button, originally developed for a Staples advertising campaign. It didn't actually exist, but people kept calling Staples and say, can I buy one of your Easy buttons? So now you actually can buy the Easy button. And it sits on your desk, and when you're frustrated, you mash it, and do you know what it does? It's actually better. It talks to you and does nothing. It does nothing of use, but it says, that was easy. Now you just did nothing. Nothing is easy, and you did it. And when I think of what Jesus is like, I think he's like a red plastic button that you bang when you're frustrated, and he does nothing, but he talks to you. So that's an example of irony in literature, which is saying something you don't actually mean, because actually Jesus is nothing like this. And the problem with copying culture, one of the problems, is that you end up importing into your Christian version of culture, that is taking some part of culture that's kind of fun and interesting, and through clever Photoshop, slapping Jesus on it. What you end up doing is importing all the assumptions of the culture straight into your presentation of the gospel. So what is it that our culture most longs for? Well, apparently it's a button. It's something that you push when you're frustrated, and ideally something would change and life would be easy. Is that actually what Jesus promises? Now, he did say my yoke is easy. However, I don't think that is my button. I think my button is easy is not an alternative version of the original Greek there. Because a yoke is something that leads you somewhere, that weighs you down even at the same time as Jesus makes it easy to bear. And that is so different from a button that when you put Jesus on that button, you are telling the world a lot more about what they already want than who Jesus is and what he actually promises. The other problem with copying culture is that you're always a step behind or several steps behind. And back when FM radios had dials and you could turn the dial, I realize this sounds ancient to some of you, but you could turn the dial and you'd hear station, music, and then music, music. I could find the Christian radio station before I heard the lyrics, because I would hear a style of music that was very popular about 5 years before. And I'd be like, 1996 synthesizers, I'd be like, oh, that's the Christian station. All right, 2002 boy band harmonies, I'd be like, oh, Christian station. Right? It's because the problem is when you copy culture, you're always waiting for culture to do something interesting, and then you run to create a Christian version of it, and that means we're never, ever contributing something new to culture. Just imitating what's come before. So, condemn, critique, copy, and then I realized I think what most of us do now is none of the above. We actually just consume culture. We just ask what's on, and whatever's on. So think about this. The fundamentalists say, never go to the movies. Schaeffer says, yes, go and read the subtitles and have deep philosophical conversations afterwards over a pipe or whatever. So that's the grandparents, the parents, but the kids just go to the movies. And we don't come out of the movies now and say, well, what did you think were the philosophical presuppositions of Harold and Kumar Do Dallas? Like, what was the underlying worldview being articulated, and is there a space for a gospel? We just go to the movies, like all of our neighbors. And in some ways, sometimes when I'm among evangelical Christians, I think these are the most plugged in people I know, the least critical, actually. How did that happen? What you'll notice about all four of these postures, well, for one thing you'll notice they all begin with the letter C, which is thanks to someone who is in this room, Jared Mackey, sitting right there, took an early version of my musings on this and taught it to his congregation. And when I got it back from Jared, who has Baptist roots, everything began with the letter C. And I realized alliteration is like the Southern Baptist spiritual gift. It's like this amazing gift to the body of Christ, and it's actually very helpful because I can remember these without needing notes. I can remember condemn, critique, copy, consume. So they all have C's in common, but they also have one other important thing in common, I think. They're all reactive. They all wait for someone else to do something, and then Christians respond with complaints, or interpretation, or imitation, or just consumption. But all of them are one step behind, waiting for someone else to do something, and then we react. And to me, that's what we got wrong. And in a way, if you want the secret to a healthy immune system, it's to not be reactive. It's actually to be offering something, contributing something, doing something no one else has thought of before, but that brings great flourishing and surprise and delight, and to use a biblical word, shalom. I started to feel that part of why we had adopted these inadequate postures is we really did not understand what culture was. So I have a very simple definition for you that I think will help illuminate what it means to actually participate in it, not just complain about it or criticize it or imitate it or consume it. And this definition comes from a fellow journalist, so it's easy to remember. If you take sociology classes, they'll give you these long definitions, which I cannot remember. But my fellow journalist, Ken Myers, came up with this fantastic, simple definition of culture. He said, culture is what human beings make of the world. It's so great. If you want it to be all one syllable, you can just say, what we make of the world. Whenever I can find something that's only words, simple, short words, I know I'm getting close to truth, in my opinion. What we make of the world. Culture is everything that human beings make, and then he adds a wonderful additional 3 words. In both senses. Culture is what human beings make of the world in both senses. So what does Ken mean by this definition? Well, first of all, culture is simply the word or the category for all the things human beings make out of the raw material, you might say, of creation. So the world gives us fibers, and human beings make clothing, right? So the fibers are natural, but clothing is cultural. It's this actual stuff that I'm wearing is culture, the actual stuff. God gives us, wood, and we make podiums like this, right? This is actually culture sitting here. There's a laptop sitting here. That's culture. There's a keyboard there. That's culture. We're in a building. That's culture. The world has sound in it, and we're using it. I'm using it to speak to you. You're using it to understand language, the use of sound to communicate. That stuff that I'm making, that transformation in my environment as speech comes out of my mouth, that's culture. And of course, now this starts to get to the second sense. Culture is what we make of the world also in that it's the meaning we make. It's the name for the human quest to make something of this mysterious, beautiful, wonderful, terrible world. This world that does not come with an explanation and yet has seemed to every human being that it must mean something. And so when you say to your neighbor, what did you make of what Andy said? You may well mean not what stuff are you going to make, but what sense are you going to make? What sense did he make? And you are, in that moment, creating some more culture. Now, the cool thing is that the way we make sense of the world, that is, make meaning of the world, is by making stuff in the world. The way these two meanings of culture are linked, and I want to illustrate this with a baby. Every presentation benefits from the inclusion of a baby, and here's the baby. This is not a baby I've ever met. It's the #1 Google image result for a baby. So, but pretty cute. And it is so funny when you're in a room like this to think about the fact that all of us were once like this little guy at this stage, pretty young. We did not have a lot of volitional control. There was not a lot we could make back then. I know what you're thinking, but volitionally. That happens unvolitionally. What could we make of the world as little babies? Very little. What do you even have control over in your first month of life, right? The ability to actually activate or actuate. Your hands haven't even found one another and, said hello, right? So there's one thing babies have volitional control over pretty much from day one. And that's their vocal tract. They can make sound. So when babies have a problem, and there are basically only 3 problems babies have, this is why I would like to be a baby again one day. Only 3 problems in my life. That would be awesome. If they are hungry, if they're wet or dirty or whatever, and if they're sleepy, right? Any of the 3 apply, and the baby cries. And the problem of parenting is figuring out which is the problem when the baby cries, because they pretty much, as near as I could tell, they cried the same way for all 3. I don't know. Some people say they have hungry cries and sleepy cries, and we never heard those cries. It was just crying. So sometimes it's 2 of the 3 or 3 of the 3 are the problem. You solve all those problems. There are these magic moments in parenting when all 3 potential problems have been solved. And the baby is well fed, has had a good nap, has a dry diaper, and then babies do not cry. Instead, they just experiment with the one thing they can make something of the world with, their vocal tract, and they start making sounds. So they'll expel the sound through their lips as they hold the lips together, and so they'll make the, puh, 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 puh. And then they'll, this is one thing our kids did, they'll just let the sound kind of bubble out through their mouth, right? One day they'll be putting the tongue behind the teeth and holding back the actuation of the vocal cords while they expel the sound. So it's called an unvoiced consonant, unvoiced dental consonant, right behind the teeth. So ta 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 ta. It's great. One day, the baby decides to try the voiced dental consonant. So you put the tongue behind the teeth, but instead of holding back the actuation of the vocal cords, you actually let them buzz as the air goes by. So instead of a T, you get a D sound. So da, 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 da. And at this moment, something amazing happens in the baby's life. This very important person in the baby's world appears over the crib, right? Picks the baby up, and with great delight says, she's saying, or he's saying, Daddy, Dada, which the baby was not doing. This was just voice dental consonant day, you know? I mean, one more experiment. But this very important figure says, you just made sense. You just said my name. And the baby, in some dawning way, realizes, I think I did something important just now. I wonder what it was. I made sound that made sense. And at that moment, that baby starts the path of the acquisition of language, realizing I can make stuff that makes sense of the world, that gives names to the most important features of my world, the people most important to me. When my son started saying Dada, or very early, on, right? It actually meant the doggy, not daddy. So we got rid of the doggy, and then it meant daddy. The baby starts to realize, I can name all these important features of my world, daddies and doggies and duckies and, whatever, and I can make sense. And at that moment, the baby has started making culture. And in many ways, actually, this is the most impressive thing any human being will ever do, acquire language. And by about the 4th year, you are perfectly fluent in whatever language is your mother tongue. So if you've ever wondered if you're ever going to do anything impressive in life, you already did it by age 4. And you're not going to do anything else equally impressive, so you might as well give up. Because it's amazing that we all have done this. We've all acquired this incredible, rich human system of making meaning by making sound. Because that's what human beings are wired to do from the moment we arrive in the world. We're wired to make something of the world. We look back not just at the beginning of every human life, but at the beginning of human civilization, and we see human beings doing this. Because we find among the earliest residue of human beings, art. And remarkable art. This bison, which is in a cave in Lascaux, France, is painted on the ceiling of a cave, and the ceiling is about 15 feet off the floor of the cave. And the bison is 6 feet across. And as best as we can tell, we can date this painting to 5,000 or 6,000 years before the Common Era, 5,000 or 6,000 BC. Picasso visited the caves in Spain in Altamira, and he came out, he had looked at paintings like this. He said, they knew everything. We've learned nothing. Because early human beings, let's actually think about this out loud for a moment. What would it take to pull off this bison on the cave of the ceiling of a cave, 15 feet off the ground, 6 feet wide, this kind of painting? What would you need in order to do that as a human being or as a community of human beings? Scaffolding. What was the? A man lift. Yeah, one of those little things, right? I think they must have had scaffolding, right? Think about this. They spent all this energy bringing scaffolding into a cave, building it up until you could reach the ceiling in order to paint this. That's amazing. What else? Lighting. You had to bring in sources of illumination to be able to see. What else? Pigments, paint. People have to go discover what when rubbed on the wall produces that right shading. Anything else? All kinds of tools to apply this, and think about how long this has lasted too. It's amazing. All of this. Now think, this is back when people are still hunting and gathering, and yet they're making art, which has no utilitarian purpose at all. Human beings, I'm just convinced, human beings are wired to make something of the world, not just in a narrow utilitarian sense, but we have this sense, this bison is worth remembering and contemplating, and perhaps in some sense it draws us to a sense of worship. I mean, how can this not have been in some way a religious act for those human beings. How could they possibly have justified? They didn't know about art for art's sake. And, let's go to the cave museum today on our day off from hunting and gathering and not being eaten by saber-toothed tigers. No. I mean, anything you did in that time, you must have done because it was absolutely crucial to do it. And they decided to paint bison. Not just eat bison, paint bison. Making something of the world. This is not just something for ancient people, it's something we do in our own way now in beautiful ways, right? Making sense by making stuff. And there's another picture of someone I actually know. This is my wife, Catherine. And my wife is a physicist, an experimental physicist. And I took this picture of her. It's not the ideal picture for projection. It's a little small and fuzzy. And behind her, it's especially blurry. But behind her is all this equipment that she uses as a physicist, this light table that she uses. To probe the quantum structure of, I'm running out of things I know to say about physics, so I'll stop there. And the amazing thing is, when you build these experimental apparatuses and you analyze the data, it makes sense in the deepest possible way because Catherine doesn't just do that, she also does math. And the crazy thing about the world is the math matches up with the world itself. The physical results of our investigating the world can be expressed in the purest form of sense-making that human beings know, which is mathematical formalism or symbolism. And here, I have no idea what those equations are. I think this is something to do with the electromagnetic field or something like that. You can represent it just as pure thought, and it ends up making sense of the world. That is amazing and crazy that the world would make that much sense. And it suggests that the world was designed that one day image bearers would come along, I'm anticipating the next part of my talk, would come along and make something of this world because the world has always made mathematical sense, but not until human beings come along. Does anyone think to say, hey, if we take the second derivative of that and put that over the third derivative of that, we'll get a model, and look, it explains what happens on this table. That's amazing. That's culture. All right. What's next? How you doing? Doing okay? They gave me a really long time. I have 30 more minutes. That's rather alarming. On the other hand, I have 4 more hours of material, so I think we're good. All right, right. One more example. Can't let this thing go to waste. So, you strike a string with a hammer, as you would on a piano, which this is designed to kind of imitate or simulate, and the string starts to vibrate. But because of physics, it actually doesn't just vibrate with one sound. So I think if I hit a key, nothing is going to happen here because I see no little lights. Yeah, I thought so. Let's see. Push that little button. This is complex culture here. I think it's going to come. It's going to wake up. Yes? There we go. When I strike that string, low C in this case, the string starts vibrating with what we call the fundamental frequency. But it also starts vibrating with a whole series of other tones at the same time. This is one of the crazy things about strings. It's just pure mathematics, pure physics. It starts vibrating not just with this fundamental note, but then also with this note, which is what we call the octave. The octave is the first overtone. If you play the guitar and you strike that halfway down the string, you get the first overtone. It's ringing in there too. And then the crazy thing is these two notes are ringing at the same time. In a single struck string, this note is actually ringing. But then also, this note is ringing in that string as well. It's the fifth above the octave. It's the second overtone. And then you add a few more overtones, and you eventually get this note, which is the sixth above the fifth, or the third of the scale. And you have what we call a major chord. The reason a major chord sounds so nice, this is just a C major chord. The reason it sounds so pleasant, doesn't that sound just nice, is all the overtones line up so nicely. So when it hits the membrane that vibrates in our ear, it all vibrates very pleasantly. And so that's why we like major chords. Oh, that sounds so Christian. And you can play this out over time by arpeggiating it. That's just playing it out in sequence like I'm doing, like Bach does. And then you can play a chord that takes you a little further away from the heart of the overtones. And now you're playing what we call kind of a 4/6 or 6 minor, whatever you want to call it, 2 minor, 7, a couple different names for it. And this chord is just a little more dissonant. It has a little sense of movement, actually, to this chord, which is the 5/7 chord. And that kind of seems to lead back in our ear to this. So let me just play that sequence and not talk over it. Isn't it interesting how Bach, in those first few measures, constructs this wonderful little home, away, home sequence? And the reason it sounds that way to us, the reason it makes that kind of sense, is because of stuff. It's because of the way the overtones work. And once he's done these 3 chords, really, he's given us basically C, F, G, C, which are the 3 most basic chords in the Western system. And if you know those 3 chords, you can be a worship leader. That is so not fair. You actually need one more chord. It's the relative minor, the A minor in this case, and that's the next chord Bach plays, actually. So he starts 1, 4, 5. I'll skip this part, I already played it for you, but now listen to what he does. Here's the next chord, it's an A minor. And now what Bach starts to do is gradually go further and further away from that home chord, that C chord. He starts to introduce little elements of tension. Hear that little bit of tension there? And resolution, tension, and resolution. He's basically taking you into more and more tension. This is the first time we hear a diminished chord. That's a little more tense still. It resolves. Another diminished chord. And that resolves. And as this piece continues, what Bach is basically going to do is take you further and further from that home chord, although every once in a while, as he's about to do, he'll take you back just for a moment. We're back at the home chord, actually, but it doesn't feel like we're done because there's actually more dissonance to explore, more harmonies to discover. And in fact, he's now going to take us to the most dissonant place in the whole piece. And this chord, which is at the very center of the first prelude, is incredibly dissonant. All those overtones are fighting. And if I just play it as a single chord, it's going to sound very ugly, so I'll do it. Ugh. But in the context of the piece, even this very dissonant chord is quite beautiful because it leads to something further. It leads to kind of a deeper kind of harmony. And now what Bach is doing is he's gradually preparing you to go back to that home chord for the last time, but not before throwing in another pretty dissonant chord and resolving it. And now you're thinking, okay, Bach, this is beautiful, but when are we going to get home? And he says, oh, we're almost home. Listen, see how it's leading back, and then he's going to throw in one last surprise, that note. A little bit of dissonance, and then the 4 chord. And then the 5. And now we're home. What is Bach doing? He's making sound, just sound in a way. But the world is wired to become music when human beings make it. And music is sound that makes sense. And this is what human beings do. I began to believe that we had ended up with some missing chapters in our Bible. One pastor had someone text him and asked, should we bring our Bibles tonight? And the answer is, you betcha. And I want to talk about this for a few moments. Because if you look in your Bible, you might find, if it's your actual working Bible rather than a brand new one, that a few chapters are missing. Because every Christian actually has a Bible within the Bible that they know what it says. You can put up a sign at a football game that says John 3:16 and everyone knows what you're talking about. But what if they put up, Malachi 3:16? Would you know? And I began to believe that when it came to culture, our Bibles were missing actually the first 2 chapters and the last 2 chapters. 4 chapters missing. The first 2 and the last 2, the bookend chapters of the Bible. And so many Christians were working with a functional Bible, at least when they talked about culture, that began in Genesis 3 and ended in Revelation 20. So Genesis 3, do you know what it is? The fall. That word isn't used in that chapter, but that's what we tend to call it. I like to call it the Declaration of Independence. I'm in Republican Colorado, Littleton, I shouldn't say those kind of things. And then at the other end, Revelation 20, that joke did not work. Revelation 20, so Genesis 3, the fall. What's Revelation 20? A little more obscure. It's the lake of fire. That's what Revelation 20 ends with. Think about what would happen if your I know your Bible actually has those bookend chapters, but imagine if your functional Bible, the Bible that gave you your story, started in Genesis 3. So the first thing you learned about was that human beings have declared independence from God, have thus fallen away from God. And then it ended with Revelation 20, the lake of fire into which the devil and all his works are thrown. And a couple of things about this. One is this is a bad news to bad news Bible. Starts with bad news, ends with bad news. And so the question becomes, well, Christians are people of good news. What's the good news in a story that begins with bad news, we're all fallen sinners, and ends with worse news, the whole thing's going to burn? Well, the good news, as the story was often told, is we don't have to be part of that story. In other words, that for people who believed, a kind of divine skyhook would come down, lift us out of that story altogether. We'd go up to another plane outside of that story and watch as it went to its natural logical conclusion in the lake of fire. And whoever was left behind, let the reader understand, would suffer the judgment of the world, but Christians would just get an escape hatch from that. And if that's what you believe about the world, what will you believe about culture? Well, you believe it's all evidence of the fall, and it's all going to be consumed. What if you have a Bible with the first 2 chapters and the last 2 chapters in place? Now, you all actually know these chapters. It's just that I think we have not let them take their full weight with how they reframe culture. What does it look like to think about culture when we move from Genesis 3 to Genesis 1? Well, in Genesis 1, we hear repeated over and over a word that was never used in other ancient Near Eastern creation accounts. The word good. Because every other creation account in the ancient Near East at the time that Genesis began to be codified and written down was a bad news creation account. They all said the world was created because of divine conflict, one way or another. And often they said the very ground we walk on, the Numa Elish says Marduk, the god of order, slays Tiamat, the fish goddess of chaos. Tiamat's like this primordial serpent. And Marduk fillets Tiamat, and the upper half of Tiamat becomes the sky. So you look up in the sky and, oh, there are stars in the sky, Mommy. What are those? Oh, well, darling Babylonian child, those are the congealed drops of blood of Tiamat. Lovely, Mommy. What is this ground we're walking on? Oh, this is the lower half of Tiamat. And Mommy, what are we? Oh, we human beings are the congealed drops of blood that ooze up from the ground, the slayed chaos monster. That's what human beings are in the Enuma Elish. Talk about worldview. Wow. Imagine your worldview. You look up at the sky, you're like, slain chaos monster above, slain chaos monster below. I'm the product of a slain chaos monster. That was the bad news creation account into which Genesis 1 is written. And Genesis 1, totally different kind of story. No obvious parallels in the ancient Near East because all it has is the Creator God, day after day, speaking, and things come into being. And every day God says, this is good. This is good. It was good, 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 good. And then there's this bonus round on the 6th day, and God says, now it's very good. How would we think about culture if we started in Genesis 1 and said, all this world, the world of sound, the world of bison, the world of speech, of the human capacity to generate speech, this is all part of the good, 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 very good world that God made. Think about Genesis Two, because I think it starts to give us some language for who we ought to be. And guess what? The language begins with the letter C. The Lord God planted a garden in Eden. So God himself starts making something of the world in Genesis 2. The first gardener is not a human being, it's God in the east. And I just want to highlight a couple things about this passage in Genesis 2. It then goes on to say, it says it's at the intersection of these different rivers, and it says the gold of that land is good. Bdellium and onyx are also there. I read this a few years ago, and I thought, why is there a metallurgical report in Genesis 2? At this intersection of rivers that all ancient people knew at that time that they were reading it didn't intersect. It's not like you can go back and dig it up. And then a friend of mine named Mako Fujimura, who I'll show you a picture of later, said to me, well, of course it's there because God intended them to leave the garden and start exploring the world. And as they explored it, they'd find this amazing natural thing called gold, and they'd cultivate it. They'd do something with it. My wedding ring is made of this substance, right? And they'll find onyx, this stone that can be carved so that its facets shine, and it's no longer just a mineral, it's a jewel. And they'll find bdellium, and I didn't know what bdellium was, but it was this sap that oozed out of trees, and it had this very pleasing aroma. It was actually very beautiful, kind of translucent white. And so ancient people would make strings of it, just like pearls. They'd string it like pearls around their neck. It was both an adornment, and it was also like ancient deodorant, because it gave off this nice aroma. All right? It's all there, waiting for human beings to go out and cultivate, to make something of. And the Lord God took the man, this is primordial humanity, not yet divided into male and female, Adam, you might call it, and put Adam in the Garden of Eden to till it and to keep it. So the first posture that I think helps us healthily relate to culture and to the world around us is to realize we're here to cultivate the world. We're here to take the already good world and till it and keep it and discover what's in it and elicit from it all that's good. But then there's another detail in Genesis 2 that gives us another C word. The two things I think we're supposed to do, cultivate and create. Because there's this very interesting detail. Out of the ground, the Lord God formed every animal of the field, every bird of the air, brought them to Adam. He's waiting for his suitable helper, the woman who will be suitable as a companion. But meanwhile, we're bringing all the other creatures to Adam to see what he would call them. And whatever Adam called every living creature, that was its name. And again, I wondered, this is an odd detail. Why would the Creator God not tell his creature, this earthling, what these things are? Why wouldn't he say, Adam, I hope you're taking notes, this is a camel. This is a cockroach. This is a terrier. Why wouldn't he just give the man the names? Instead, the creator of the whole world steps back, brings this creature in front of his own creation, and whatever name Adam utters, whatever name he creates, God says, that's what it's called. In other words, the creator makes space for his creature's creativity. Makes space for his speech, his language, for him to speak something, and that's what it is. The two postures we're called to as human beings is to cultivate the world and then to create in the world. And I've never seen a better picture of it than this painting by Rembrandt. I wonder, this is a bit of an audible, but Jake, if it's possible to bring the lights down so that we can really see this painting. This painting is called The Artist in His Studio, at least that's what we call it now. I don't know if Rembrandt called it that. It was painted by Rembrandt when he was about 23 years old, which is totally not fair. And it's actually very small. It's in the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. You can go see it right in the middle of the room. It's on a pedestal. It's just about the size of my laptop screen. It's a very small painting. And I'd like you to look at it with that same neighbor who looked at the ad. Take a minute and look at this painting with your neighbor and just see what you see. What do you notice about it? What's striking about it? And what postures, what kind of cultivating and creating does it seem to show? Go ahead and find a neighbor and just talk about what you see in this painting. Take about 30 more seconds. Look for something else you haven't seen yet and talk about it. All right, finish that thought. let's just talk about it for a minute. Keep the lights low so we can see it in good fidelity, and just brief observations. What did you notice? What do you see in this marvelous little painting? Yeah?
I don't think he's begun yet. The painter's palette behind him on the wall, he's envisioning possibilities.
You are thinking he hasn't started yet because there's some palettes behind him that haven't been used yet. How many, when you saw this painting, kind of your first thought was he hasn't begun, the canvas is blank? Quite a few, yeah, and that was my initial reaction actually. How many thought he's in the middle? He's stepped back to see what he's going to do next. Oh, wow, a lot. And those people all think there is the obvious right interpretation. They're like, yep, of course. And how many thought he's actually done and he stepped back to look at his finish? Not a small number, actually. Isn't that amazing? He's painted a painting that's about all three stages of creativity. That's one of the geniuses of this painting is he doesn't show us what's on the canvas, and so it's actually about all three. He is, in fact, it's hard to see, I know in projection, I've studied it pretty carefully at the museum. He is holding his tools. So yeah, he could have started. But I think one of the beautiful things of this painting is it's about the moment in life, or well, in work, also in life, where you're standing back saying, what am I going to create here? And it's blank. And it's also about the moment in work and life when you're standing saying, well, what have I done? What needs to be done? Oh, what a mess, right? And it's about the moment when you stand back and you say, this is good. In fact, when my daughter was 8 years old, I had this on my laptop screen as my kind of screensaver for a while. And she came up behind me one day. I said, Amy, what do you think the painter's thinking as he stands there? And she said something I never would have come up with. She said, oh, he's thinking what God thought when God created the world. It's very good. And I thought, A, you're going to be a theologian. And then B, I thought, that is the voice of someone who has not yet internalized the critic. Because when I look at this painting, my instinct is he's thinking, oh, I totally messed up the perspective over there, and very bad color choice on that corner, have to fix that. But my daughter just immediately thought, oh, of course what he's doing is he's celebrating what he's made. And the truth is, it's about all those moments in being a creator. What else? Yeah.
Because of the size of the easel and where it is in the frame, it makes it feel like he's creating something bigger than himself.
He's creating something bigger than himself. He's painted himself so small in perspective back there compared to this looming easel, as if to say, ultimately, this is not about me. This is about the work I've been called to do. This is about making something that, in fact, will last longer than I will last. Yeah. What else? Yeah. You see the opposite. Because he hasn't shown us maybe what he's producing, we're drawn to think about his role. And I think you're right. With the fact that the work is of great significance actually in no way diminishes the significance of this artist. In fact, he's wearing very elaborate clothes. Did any of you notice this? I don't think this is how painters dressed. I think this is odd. He seems to have dressed up for the occasion, is the best I could do. One or two other observations. Yeah. Did you want to follow up on that?
The irony is that it's a very small painting in actuality, but the canvas is huge.
A very small painting about a very large work. And in the room where this is in the museum, all the paintings on the walls are these huge canvases. And then there's this little painting that says, but this is what it took to do it. Yeah, there was a comment. Yeah.
The rest is in disrepair, but he's got expensive brushes, very nice
Wow.
easel, but the rest of the room is in disrepair, so it's definitely very important.
He has prioritized this work over, say, wall repair and probably heating. That might be the other reason he's wearing these robes. It's pretty cold and he needs extra layers. All of his resources have been applied where they can do the most to create something of real significance. And nothing, this is not a rich artist. It's not probably a leisure artist, but it's an artist who's willing to devote his best to the work. And hey, let the rest of the studio kind of crumble. It's okay. One or two more. It's so fascinating what folks see. So many. Yes. Okay. He's arranged all the lights on the canvas, right? I think there's something here for us. If we want all the light on us, kind of like it is for me now, hopefully that has a purpose. If it's all about us, we're not likely to actually create. The light has to be on the canvas. Yeah.
That was my statement.
Oh, that was yours too. And one more. Yes.
I think back to the cracked walls and things, it could also mean that you don't have to wait till you have everything in order.
Oh,
to create.
wow.
That be who God's called you to be where you are right now, and just do what you can where you are at the moment.
Wow. There's nothing elaborate about this. There's all that's needed is the willingness to develop the skill and the patience and the attention. There's not even a lot. There are definitely some equipment here, but he can afford that if he doesn't try to afford everything else. It doesn't require a lot except the willingness to do it, to step into it. Mako, who I mentioned, and I really am going to introduce you to him before we're done, says if you have only $100 to make a difference in the world, give it to a painter. Because a painter can do more with $100 than anyone else. But in a way, it's true for all of us. There's something we can do with what we have that will create something that does not now exist, that will come into the world and be, well, to get to my next, and getting sort of towards being final slide, which is that what I think we're here to do in the world is to take the good world that God made, and as we cultivate and create in it, it becomes very good. The painter starts with good materials, the linen, or whatever raw material the canvas is made of, the wood of the easel, the pigments of the paint. These are all natural. But then an image bearer comes along, cultivates, creates, and now something appears in the world that was not there before that is very good, at least potentially, at least if it's Rembrandt, right? And this is the pattern from nature to culture, good to very good. The world is full of grain, right? So human beings harvest the grain, they crush it, they mix it with yeast and water and salt, they bake it at the right temperature, and out comes bread. And I would say, grain is good, but bread is very good. The world has eggs in it. Eggs are natural. Human beings borrow the eggs after asking permission. The chickens always, at least in our house, crack the eggs, cook the eggs, maybe add some ham and peppers or whatever, and you have an omelet. And I would say eggs are good, but omelets are very good. The world has grapes in it. You know where this is going. Human beings take the grapes, crush the grapes so the yeast on the outside mixes with the juice on the inside, put it in the right conditions for a certain amount of time, draw off the result, and if they're Baptists, they get grape juice. Which is actually a major technological achievement, because actually, normally you get wine, or well, actually, if you don't pay attention, you just get vinegar. But if you do it with patience and you're Anglican, like I am, you get wine. And I would say grapes are good, but wine is very good. Nature, culture, good, very good. This is what we're meant to do in the world. The most basic way to understand your calling as a human being is you've been placed in a good world by a good God to cultivate and create in such a way that a little more of the very goodness that is possible in the world is brought to light and brought to reality. And we do that as physicists, we do it as artists, we do it as business people, we do it as lawyers, we do it as teachers. We take good and we work on moving it toward very good, and then we move to the other end of the story. Now, wow. I have very little time to do the 3 more hours of material. I sometimes think that everyone who speaks should have in front of them the words of Jesus to his disciples in John 14. I have much more to say to you, but you cannot bear it now. So, what can you bear? That's the question I must think. Can I take 6 more minutes? Is that okay? All right. And then maybe we'll have a little time for conversation. But we have to go to this the ending of the story, right? Revelation 20. What if we don't end there, but we end in Revelation 21? I'm going to do this really fast. We read, I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy garden, the restored Garden of Eden, coming down out of heaven from God, with none of that icky human culture to be found in it anywhere. This, of course, is not Revelation 21. This is Second Opinions, 3:15, one of the most read and quoted books of the Bible, actually. God helps those who help themselves, Second Opinions 2:7. There's a lot in that book that we know by heart. Of course, this is not what it says. Isn't it amazing this isn't what it says? Because if I told you, look, at the end of the story, everything sad is going to come untrue. And actually the end is this beautiful recapitulation of the beginning. And all the devastation of the human Declaration of Independence is undone by the gift of God. You'd say, oh, awesome, we get to go back to the garden. No. Instead, of course, what it says, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it says, I saw the holy city. The destiny of redeemed humanity is a city, not a garden. And a city is a place where culture has reached critical mass, where there's nowhere you can go to be delivered from culture in a city. Because it's all been cultivated. Creativity has saturated it all. And just look at a couple features of the city. The foundations of the wall of the city are adorned with every jewel. Not minerals, jewels. The difference between a mineral and a jewel is the difference between nature and culture. It's minerals that have been worked on by a jeweler. God's not just a gardener, God's a jeweler. Those jewels include pure gold, clear as glass, onyx, and there are 12 pearls that are the gates of the city. Do you recall the gold, onyx, and stuff that was kind of like pearls? Those original resources outside the garden have now been brought to their fullness in the redeemed city. What about this gold transparent as glass? I used to think that didn't sound very natural or cultural. And then I met this friend I keep mentioning, Mako, whose picture I'm going to show in a little bit, but I want to show you one of his paintings first. Mako's works in abstract expressionism, in a way, and he takes these layers of gold leaf. This is a painting of his called Golden Summer. And he layers them over paint that he splashed on canvas. And what happens, gold leaf is very, very thin. It's been beaten by artisans until it's micrometers thin. And when Mako layers that gold leaf over the paint that he splashed, it's not really visible in a digital projection like this. But when you're with this painting, the colors come through the gold leaf because the gold leaf is so thin that it's translucent. It's not transparent. This is a very ancient technique. And I was with Mako one day looking at this amazing stuff he uses. And I thought when John's readers heard gold transparent as glass, they would have immediately thought hammered gold. Gold that someone's cultivated, that someone's worked with the greatest of skill until not just like sort of human hammered gold, it's translucent. But this is the best hammered gold you can imagine, transparent like glass. And of course, in this city, the kings of the earth will bring their glory into it. People will bring into it the glory and honor of the nations. The city is going to be full of the fruits of human cultivating and creating. This is something we are not often taught, I've found. We often have the idea that the only eternal thing is human souls. I've heard it said, when you meet a human being, you're meeting the only eternal thing you'll ever meet. But Revelation 21 says, the glory and honor of the nations will be brought in. And what is that? That's the fruit of all the human acts of cultivating, I think. This is not, I'll give you my last little point, and then I'll show you what's gone wrong, and then I'll end with a story, and then I really will be done. Ultimately, it's not just good to very good. The goal of culture is to move from very good to glory. And glory to me is just the magnificence of true being. It's the magnificence of a world that will have been tended by its maker and redeemer and his image bearers to such an extent that every possibility is unfolded. Every potentiality is heard. Every piece of music has been written and heard and sung and played. Every possibility that was latent in the original creation will be fully, overwhelmingly expressed in the new creation to the glory of its maker. It will all be culture because finally God's will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Why would Jesus have taught us to pray that, by the way? If eventually God was going to say, actually, that's not working out. The earth is just going to go into the lake of fire, and if you all can just come up to heaven, we'll settle for my will being done in heaven as it is in heaven, and forget the earth part. Jesus did not teach us to pray a prayer that would not be answered. The prayer will be answered, and the earth will be full of the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. By the way, of the knowledge of the glory of the Lord. How can you have knowledge without knowers? The earth will be full of image bearers who now know their Maker, know everything about his creation, and say, it is very good to the glory of God. That's what culture is yearning for. That's where it's heading. I have to skip one slide. Sorry, it would have been fun, but no time. I want to show you Mako. I want to show you his work. And I want to introduce you to two artists. I know there are many kinds of culture we can make, but just let me end by talking about the kind of art we can make if this is our vision. It's not copy art. It's not just art criticism. It's beautiful, transformative stuff, and I want to show you how. Mako is a Japanese-American painter who I have the privilege of calling a friend, and he does these massive canvases sometimes. He has this amazing way of taking these very simple pigments. He doesn't make pictures of things generally, but he makes paintings that speak to the glory that's to come because they use these glorious materials like gold layered here, sort of sprayed or sprinkled, but also these deep, dark, rich pigments of blues. And they speak both of hope and of the tragedy of the world too. They have a kind of darkness to them. They have a kind of pain to them. Mako's work compresses all of human experience into abstract form so that everyone can access it. It's not a picture of a particular thing. It's an evocation of a way of living in the world. Sometimes extremely colorful. Just beautiful stuff. This is the kind of art that human beings are meant to make. And Mako makes it because he's a Christian culture maker, taking very ancient forms like Nihonga, the Japanese technique that gives rise to these ways of splashing paint on canvas, but then bringing them into total conversation with the modern world. Through Mako, I got a Facebook friend request from someone a few years ago named David Sachs, who I had never met, so I rejected the Facebook friend request. And then I found out he was my neighbor, and that was a little embarrassing. He lived just a mile down the road from me, and I also found out, I have a picture of him too, I have a picture of Mako. Here's David with his family, Angie and their 4 kids. And I discovered that David was actually an extraordinary artist himself, and that I had been an idiot not to want to be his friend. David is a photographer. David had become a commercial photographer early in life, but he had decided to use his photography skills on the continent of Africa to make portraits of human beings that elicited and evoked the very goodness and even the glory of human beings in the poorest countries of the world. And when I got to know David, he was working on this series taken in Africa, these incredible images that speak of such beauty and dignity. Some of them very simple. Perhaps my favorite one is this one, where David takes the time as an artist to behold this woman who obviously has had a difficult life and who in conventional senses is not necessarily beautiful. But what emerges from this portrait is the very goodness, indeed the glory of an image bearer of God. Cultivating and creating. Also did some beautiful work in color. One of his, he has this amazing painting of kids, photograph of kids running. And one of them actually ended up on this book cover, which Oprah picked. So for a while I'd go through airports and see David's beautiful photograph of this child running the way children are meant to run, even in an environment of great danger and pain. That's the kind of culture you make if you've been shaped by the whole story. And let me end with this. It'll take a couple minutes to tell this, but it thickens this and takes it where I think it has to go. On October 31st, 2011, I got a text message from David, who had become one of my best friends. He said, I'm at Riddle Memorial Hospital in Delaware County, and I've just been diagnosed with cancer. They had found cancer in David's lungs, but it turned out that actually cancer was everywhere in David's body. It's what we call stage 4 cancer, cancer of unknown primary. That is, who knows where it came from, but now it was everywhere. And my friend entered into the journey that we'll all go through, the journey toward really what was always an end that without an absolute miracle could not be averted. And the miracle was that a year and a half later, David was still alive and actually incredibly well, able to be a father to his children, able to be a friend to his friends, but in the midst of a battle for his life. And his art friends decided to do something for this family. They decided, let's actually have a benefit art show for David and Angie. And they called it, I have it here, Das Bomb, which sounds so cool and German, but actually just stood for David and Angie Sachs Benefit Art Market. And what they did is they said, all right, the worst that you could imagine is happening to our friends, David and Angie and their kids. David's just my age, to have him contemplating not having a full life with his kids, Angie having to raise them by themselves. Let's make something beautiful out of this. And so all these artists who knew David in Philadelphia and New York said, we're going to put works in a gallery curated show, and people can buy them, but it's going to be a real art show. It's not going to be some charity thing. The gallery owners donated their half. Usually gallery owners take 50%. And so they said, we're going to donate that to the family, but the artists, actually, any work that was bought, the artist would get the support of having someone buy their work, which is really important. And so from all over the Northeast and even further around the world came works of art. One from the former design director of the New York Times, this amazing sculpture. Works of abstract art, works by very sophisticated working artists, works involving male genitalia, so we'll keep moving along. And I had looked in the catalog and seen this work by Mako, our mutual friend Mako, who had contributed this painting called Lux Aeterna from the Requiem Mass. Let light eternal shine on them, Lord. So this painting was for sale, and I learned that Mako, because he's such an established artist, had said, I don't want my half of the proceeds. I want the full proceeds of my painting to go to the family. I forgot to tell you where this was. This show happened on Walnut Street in Philadelphia, right across from the Apple Store, the most prestigious street in Philadelphia, in this beautiful gallery space on an October night. And it got in USA Today. Hundreds of people came. It was the most amazing night, right in downtown Philadelphia, of creating something amazingly beautiful out of a very painful situation. And Mako's painting was there, 100% of the proceeds going to David and Angie, and Catherine and I thought, I wonder if we should buy it. I've always kind of wanted to own a Fujimura. The price was $20,000, which is a little more than we usually spend on art. I don't know. I'm sure there's a range in this room, but that's a lot for our family. That's several credit cards, basically. And I said to David before the show, I said, look, David, we are in it with your family. We will do anything for you, but I'm not sure we're going to buy $20,000 worth of art. We'll give it to you if your family needs it, but I don't know if that's what we're supposed to do. So we would pretty much decide we're not going to buy anything. We're just going to go. It was the most amazing night of friendship. There was a winery that brought wine. There was a brewery that brought beer. There were people just meeting, enjoying one another, looking at incredible work and buying work, raised over $100,000 that night for the family. And there was a second painting by Mako that had not been in the catalog, called Lux Aeterna 2. And Catherine and I walked in, and we were just gripped by it. It's very hard to project it and have you understand how beautiful this painting is, where Mako has allowed this pigment to dry, partially dry on the canvas, but then he's drenched it with water, this flood of water. And as it's been drenched, it's dripped down, and it's created all these incredibly complex fractal patterns that speak both of beauty and suffering, both harmony and dissonance. And then he's layered just a few squares of gold leaf behind it. So I grabbed Catherine and I took her out on the street outside the gallery, and I said, Catherine, are we in it with this family? Are we going to spend $20,000 on things that they'll need and supporting them, whatever comes? Absolutely. So why not have a painting? So we maxed out 3 credit cards. Don't tell my parents-in-law what we did with that money. And we repainted our living room, and there was a wall. I'd always wanted to have an icon wall, a wall with icons on it to remind me of who we're meant to be and who God is. And this painting is now on that wall. And in April, we buried my friend David. And in his last days, I witnessed more love and more truth than I've ever seen in my life. And now, for the rest of my life and the rest of my children's life, and maybe our children's children, we have this actual peace. It's just stuff at one level. It's just stuff. Just canvas and pigment drenched with water, left to dry. But this makes sense of my life, of David's life, of our loss, of our ongoing friendship with his family. And what I love about it is it's all gift. Mako gave the painting. We gave the money. And David, in a sense, gave his life in such a way that it invited all the rest of us into this circle of generosity and beauty. That's what we're made for. That's culture. That's what it is to be a human being. Thanks be to God. Thank you so much for your time and attention tonight. I'll leave it up to Kevin whether we do any questions or whatever, but I am just so grateful that you've spent this night with me. Thank you.